Good to have you with us. Let's take a look at what's happening as far as the economic week ahead is concerned. Well, we know that the JSE is going to be fairly turbulent because of the bourse losses over the last couple of weeks as well. We'll talk about what that could look like a little bit later. We'll bring you the market indicators. First of all, let's bring into the conversation, is becoming a regular guest here on eNCA, and quite looking forward to it every week, Joseph Busha from Busha Investment Group. Joseph, good to have you back with us.
Good morning.
So we're happy. We've had a good Heritage Day weekend as well. How positive are we feeling, knowing we're looking ahead to the Cosatu Congress as well, aren't we?
Oh, which is where horses really. I think the week should be as colorful as Heritage Day, you know, where everybody comes in their traditions and so on, just show the diversity really. But I think Cosatu is going to focus on labor, and secondly on Eskom. One of the things I wish is obviously if they could say how do they help in terms of fixing the energy crisis at Eskom. Remember, NUMSA is the biggest union at Eskom, so I hope they're going to help government in finding solutions and way forward. And I'm aware that, you know, they're just calling for the CEO and the COO to resign. But I think it needs to be a concerted effort to say, how do we get out of this crisis?
And we're just on the Cosatu element as well, because I would imagine that would be seen as investment uncertainty as well, because the moment you start changing the bigwigs at a parastatal like Eskom, while the public, many in the public are calling for it, that does have a knock-on effect for investor confidence, because now you've got a new team coming in and investors sit back and wait to see how they feel about this, don't they?
Investors like stability. They like predictability, that, you know, you should be able to predict things in terms of who is coming and so on. So often changes that has happened in Eskom, you know, has not helped. Or remember, on average, no CEO has lived or stayed more than 2 years at Eskom. Possibly we had more than 23, 24 CEOs since 1994.
It's a staggering number, isn't it?
That is staggering, yes.
Can we just talk a little bit about issues affecting employment as well? Because the electricity crisis, Joseph, I'm sure you'll agree, has gotten so bad now, it's starting to affect jobs and employment. And knowing how bad our job numbers are in this country, the blackouts certainly aren't helping. But I know the latest job numbers, something we have to discuss as well. And I don't imagine it's all that positive.
Well, I think last year we recorded a very small number, about 42,000 new jobs last year. So your temporary, possibly employees are going to be increasing slightly because of the uneasing of the COVID. But I think if we were to look at it, most restaurants, a couple of restaurants closed. We're seeing a merger between African Bank and Green Road. Caxton is going to also merge with Impact. So when companies merge, certainly they downsize their number of staff as well. So that is going to be quite key, I think, in terms of the job market to see where we go. The the electricity cuts also won't be helping, because I think a lot of companies won't be producing as much as they would, and certainly they have to take a little bit of some adjustment, which is really normally, you know, your salary bill, which is really cutting jobs.
Yeah, speaking of production as well, we need to talk about the PPI as well, Producer Price Index as well. What's the expectation there?
It was 18% in July. It might ease a little bit if you see also credit extension might ease from 7.5 to 7.1, but I think that normally leads inflation, your core inflation. So at 18%, if it comes possibly just below 18, I think the expectation is about 17.3 or 17.7. That's where it is in kind of likely to settle. But I think it's still very relatively high, that we might not be able to get out of it, at least for this year. Possibly things will start looking better in the first quarter of 2023.
Yeah, it's that first quarter, the Q1 of 23, where we started measuring back to the first quarter of 2022, when we spoke about a post-COVID recovery. We can start getting a sense of what that recovery actually looks like. Joseph, just before I let you go as well, we will bring up the market indicators. I'll throw to them in a second. But oil, because many people will care about oil, of course, because that affects our fuel price as well. Are we expecting fuel to hold steady? Because we all want lower fuel prices, don't you? What's your crystal ball say?
We got a decrease in there. So oil, I think, is going to hold a little bit now, given the fact that, you know, obviously overseas we're going into the winter, whereas in Africa I think it's a little bit warmer. So possibly the demand will be less. But I think if you look in terms of here, you know, a lot of people are using generators. Possibly, you know, there's still be a lot of increase. We saw some respite in oil prices or fuel prices about last month. I think there was a reduction. So I think if that continues, that will reduce puts a bit of pressure on transport costs and inflation. But I think, we cannot hold on to that. You see where the rand is now, above 18 rands to the dollar, 18.04, and that is not really good for the economy, because that will affect in terms of our inflation, that will affect in terms of our pricing of petrol on the retail or at the pumps if it remains higher than 18 rands to the dollar.
Yeah, and that's, I think, everyone was worried about. We just had that interest rate increase last week as now as well. Now we've just peaked back into 18 against the US dollar. So the rand at its lowest level since, I think it's May 2020 at the moment as well. So we have to keep a very close eye on the rand. Joseph Busha, thank you so very much for coming, and I really hope to speak to you again soon. Joseph Busha from Busha Investment joining us this morning. You heard Joseph talking about the oil and also what's happening with the rand. Here is the latest.